The heat in Silver Creek, Colorado, wasn't just in the sun that baked the dusty streets. It was in the whispers. And in the summer of 1878, those whispers followed Abigail Evans like a shadow. She clutched a worn shawl around her shoulders, a pointless gesture in the August swelter, but it was all she had left to hold on to. They called her Destitute Abby, sometimes behind her back, sometimes right to her face. Ever since her husband Thomas had been crushed in a mining accident, she was nothing. Less than nothing. A widow with 3 hungry children, a pile of debts, and a cabin that was one stiff breeze away from becoming a woodpile. She walked past Bartlett's General Store, her chin held as high as she could manage. On the porch, like vultures on a wire, sat Mrs. Holloway and her friends. Their snickers were as sharp as broken glass. Abigail ignored them. She had to. She was only 32, with auburn hair and whiskey-colored eyes, but grief had already carved its map onto her face. "Look at her boots," Mrs. Holloway said, her voice loud enough to carry. "Threadbare." "I heard she's begging for scraps from the butcher," another woman laughed. "Someone ought to tell her about the church collection box for the truly desperate." Abigail's face burned, a hot flush of shame, but her stride never faltered. It was true she'd asked for the cheaper cuts of meat, but she always paid. Pride was a meal she couldn't afford when Emma, Sarah, and little Daniel were waiting at home. The bank didn't care about pride. They cared about the money Thomas had borrowed, the money that was now buried under a mountain of rock and dirt. She had 2 weeks, 14 days until she and her children were put out on the street. "Mrs. Evans." The voice was deep, steady. It stopped her cold. She turned. A man's tall frame was a black silhouette against the blinding sun. It was Yancey Tucker. At 28, Yancey was a legend in the territory, a horse wrangler without equal. His skill with a rope was famous, so was his silence. He kept to himself, a man apart from the town's petty dramas. "Mr. Tucker," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She smoothed her faded dress, suddenly aware of every patch, every stain. "I was hoping to find you," he said, taking off his hat. His hair was sandy blonde, his eyes as blue as the Colorado sky. "I hear you're looking for work." Abigail's eyes darted around. People were watching, listening. "I am," she admitted, her voice stronger now. "I can cook, clean. I'll do anything to keep a roof over my children's heads." From the porch, Mrs. Holloway's voice cut through the air. "As if anyone would hire her. Can't even buy shoes for her own children." Yancey's jaw tightened. He didn't look at Abigail. He turned his head just slightly toward the gossiping women. "Mrs. Holloway," he called out, his voice ringing across the street like a blacksmith's hammer. "I'd reckon a lady of your standing has better things to do than comment on the fortunes of others." The woman huffed, but she fell silent. Yancey turned back to Abigail, his gaze softening. "My ranch hand, Salis, broke his leg last week. I need someone to cook for the men, keep the house in order. The pay is $15 a month, plus room and board for you and your family." Abigail's heart stopped. $15. It was a fortune. It was salvation. "Mr. Tucker, that's too generous." "I'm not being generous, ma'am. I'm offering fair pay for honest work," he said, his voice firm. Then he raised it, just enough for the whole street to hear. "And I don't give a damn what anyone in this town thinks about your circumstances. Some folks measure wealth in dollars. I measure it in character." Mrs. Holloway scoffed from her perch. "She hasn't got 2 pennies to rub together, Yancey Tucker. You're taking in a charity case." Yancey didn't even bother to look her way. His eyes were locked on Abigail's, and he said the words that would change everything. "She's rich enough for me." The street fell dead silent. The only sound was the buzzing of flies and the frantic beating of Abigail's own heart. "Can you start tomorrow?" he asked, his voice low again, just for her. Yes, she breathed. There was no other answer. Yes, I can. She didn't know it then, but she had just made a deal with a man who was living a profound lie. His kindness was a mask, and underneath it was a secret that connected his past directly to her husband's grave. The next morning, under a sky painted pink and gold, Abigail loaded their few belongings onto a borrowed wagon. Her 3 children watched, their faces a mixture of fear and excitement. 10-year-old Emma sat stoically beside her brother Daniel, who at 5 was just confused. 8-year-old Sarah clutched a rag doll, her eyes wide. "Will there be horses, Mama?" she asked for the 10th time. "Yes, sweetheart," Abigail promised, tying down the last bundle. "The finest horses in the territory." And, and we'll have enough to eat?" Emma asked, her quiet question tearing at Abigail's heart. "We will," she said, brushing the hair from her daughter's face. "We will." The Tucker Ranch was 5 miles out of town, a different world entirely. It wasn't a sprawling empire, but it was solid. A sturdy main house, a bunkhouse, a big red barn, and corrals where beautiful horses grazed in the morning sun. Yancey was in one of the corrals, working with a fiery black horse. His movements were like a dance, a silent conversation between man and animal. He saw them arrive and swung down from the saddle with an easy grace, handing the reins to another cowboy. "Mrs. Evans," he said, tipping his hat, "welcome to Blue Ridge Ranch." "Thank you, Mr. Tucker," she said, feeling dusty and disheveled. "Yancey, please," he insisted, then crouched down to look her children in the eye. "And you must be the Evans Brigade." Daniel hid behind her skirts, but Emma, always so formal, stepped forward. "I'm Emma, sir. This is Sarah and Daniel. We're very grateful." Yancey's smile was genuine. "It's a pleasure, Miss Emma, and your mother will be earning her keep. I expect you'll all be a big help." He pointed to a small, neat cabin 100 yards from the main house. "That'll be your place. It's not fancy, but it's solid and dry." To Abigail, after months of worrying they'd be sleeping in a tent, it looked like a palace. That night she cooked her first meal for the ranch hands, a hearty beef stew that disappeared from their plates in minutes. The cowboys were respectful, quiet men who seemed grateful for a home-cooked meal. Yancey ate with them, and afterward, as Abigail washed the mountain of dishes, he came into the kitchen. "You've made quite an impression," he said, rolling up his own sleeves to help dry. "Hank says it's the best stew he's had since he left Texas." "I'm glad," Abigail said, relieved. He hesitated for a moment. "I know this isn't easy for you, Mrs. Evans. Leaving your home, working for a stranger." "Abigail, please," she corrected gently. "And it's easier than watching my children starve." He nodded, a deep understanding in his eyes. "Well, Abigail, you and your children are safe here. I want you to know that." "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "Not just for the job, for what you said in town. It's been so hard since Thomas died. The whispers. People fear what they don't understand," Yancey said, his voice thoughtful. "It's easier to mock than to have compassion." She looked at him then, really looked at him. There was a depth to this quiet cowboy she hadn't expected, a sadness almost. As they finished the dishes, a fragile sense of peace settled over her. This was a new start, a real one. She was wrong. It wasn't a start. It was an ending, wrapped up in a new beginning. She was standing in the kitchen of the man who held the key to her husband's final moments. The first week flew by. Abigail and the children fell into a new rhythm, governed by the rising and setting of the sun. She cooked and cleaned, washed and mended, and for the first time in a year, she slept through the night without the gnawing fear of homelessness. Her children, set loose from the cramped, judgmental town, began to blossom. Daniel became a tiny shadow to the cowboys. Sarah found a secret talent for charming eggs out of the hens. And Emma, serious, worried Emma, started to smile again. On the 8th day, Abigail was hanging laundry when she felt eyes on her. Yanzi was leaning against the corral fence, just watching. He'd been breaking horses all morning, and his shirt was damp with sweat, clinging to the hard lines of his body. She felt a blush creep up her neck and quickly looked away. "Abigail," he called, walking toward her. "I was thinking, maybe the children would like to learn to ride." She stopped, a wet shirt in her hands. "Ride? Horses?" He laughed, a warm, easy sound. "Well, I'm fresh out of tame buffalo." She couldn't help but smile. "They would love it, but I couldn't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering," he said gently. "It's an essential skill out here." Just then, Emma and Sarah came tearing around the house. "Mama, Mr. Tucker is going to teach us to ride." "Eavesdropping is not polite," Abigail chided, but her heart wasn't in it. "Please, Mama," Sarah begged. Yanzi just watched, an amused look on his face. "I promise they'll be safe. We'll start slow." Looking at her daughter's shining, hopeful faces, Abigail couldn't say no. That Sunday became the first of many. Yanzi was a patient teacher, his calm voice and steady hands guiding the girls on a gentle mare named Daisy. Daniel, too small to ride alone, got to sit in front of Yanzi on his own powerful horse, his face puffed up with pride. Abigail watched from the fence, her heart aching with a strange mix of gratitude and something else, something she couldn't name. As Emma took her second turn, Yanzi came to stand beside her. "They're naturals," he said. "I wouldn't know," Abigail admitted. "I've never ridden a horse." He turned, surprised. "Never?" "Grew up in towns," she explained. "My father was a shopkeeper. Thomas. He always said he'd teach me someday." The mention of his name was a sudden pang, a familiar ghost at the feast. Yanzi was quiet for a moment. Then he said, so softly she almost didn't hear it, "I could teach you if you'd like." The offer was more than just a riding lesson. It felt like something shifting between them, a gate opening into a new country. She met his clear blue eyes and nodded. "I'd like that very much." The lessons became their ritual. As August bled into September, Abigail found a freedom on horseback she'd never known. The world looked different from the back of a horse, wider and full of possibility. One crisp Sunday, Yanzi suggested they ride out farther. "There's a meadow about a mile from here," he said, helping her mount Daisy. "The view is—" "Well, you'll see." The children were being watched by the wife of one of the ranch hands, so they rode out alone. When they reached the top of a low hill, the meadow spread out below them, a carpet of purple and gold wildflowers rolling toward the distant, jagged mountains. "Oh, Yanzi," she breathed, "it's beautiful." "It's my thinking spot," he admitted. They dismounted, letting the horses graze as they walked. The sun was warm, but a cool autumn breeze whispered of the winter to come. "You seem happier," he observed. "The children, too." "We are," she said, and it was the honest truth. "For the first time since Thomas died, I feel safe." She looked at him. "You've given us a home, Yanzi." He shook his head. "You've earned it. This place hasn't run so smooth in years. To be honest," he picked a purple flower, twirling it in his fingers, "I never knew how lonely this ranch was until you all came." The confession hung in the air. "You? Lonely? Respect isn't the same as connection," he said quietly. "The men work for me. The town sees a successful rancher, but nobody sees, just Yanzi." He handed her the flower. "You do, I think." Her fingers brushed his as she took it. The touch was electric. For a breathless moment the world stood still. She thought he was going to kiss her. She wanted him to. Instead, he cleared his throat and took a step back. We should head back." The ride back was quiet, charged with unspoken words. As they neared the ranch, Abigail saw a fancy black carriage parked by the main house, a carriage that screamed of money and power. "Are you expecting visitors?" she asked. Yancey's face hardened. "No." He stared at the carriage, his jaw tight. "That's Judge Carrington's." Just as he spoke, a woman emerged from the house. She was beautiful, dressed in expensive blue silk, carrying a parasol to protect her from the sun of the working ranch. It was Olivia Carrington, the judge's daughter. "Yancey, darling," she called out, her voice like honey laced with poison. "Father and I stopped by to invite you to the harvest ball." Her eyes swept over to Abigail, taking in her simple clothes and wind-tangled hair. The look was pure disdain. "Mrs. Evans, isn't it? The widow. Yancey's housekeeper." The word was an insult. Yancey's expression was a mask of polite neutrality. He helped Abigail down from her horse, his touch lingering at her waist. "Miss Carrington, this is a surprise." "Father is inside," Olivia purred, ignoring Abigail completely. "He's very keen to discuss business with you. He's thinking of investing in a few promising local ranches." Abigail saw a flicker of something in Yancey's eyes. Interest. An investment from the judge could change everything for him. "I'll be right in," he told Olivia. Then he turned to Abigail, his voice low. "Would you mind taking care of the horses?" "Of course," she said, her heart sinking. She took the reins, suddenly feeling like the hired help again. As she led the horses toward the barn, she heard Olivia's voice, sharp and clear on the breeze. "Really, Yancey? A widow with 3 children? What are people saying?" Abigail didn't hear his reply. She didn't want to. It was just a job. The moment in the meadow was a fantasy. She had to remember that. She was there to work, not to dream. But that night, as she sat on her porch mending a shirt, Yancey appeared out of the darkness. "May I join you?" She nodded, and he sat on the step beside her. The silence stretched, filled only by the chirping of crickets. "The judge made me an offer," he said finally. "Enough money to double my herd, buy another 500 acres. "That's wonderful, Yancey," she said, and she meant it. He didn't look at her. He stared out into the night. "There's a condition." She waited. "He wants me to court Olivia, with the intention of marriage." The words were a punch to the gut. She kept her face impassive, her hands still. "I see. It's the kind of opportunity that doesn't come along twice," he said, his voice flat. "No," she agreed softly. "It doesn't. Miss Carrington is a beautiful woman, from a fine family." "She is," he acknowledged. Then he added, "She also mentioned that my having you here was causing talk." Abigail's needle stopped. "I am sorry if I've caused you trouble. Perhaps it would be best if I—" "No," he cut in, his voice sharp. He turned to face her, his blue eyes intense in the lantern light. "That's not what I want." "What do you want, Yancey?" she asked, her voice shaking just a little. He reached out, gently taking the mending from her hands. "I want someone who sees me, not my ranch," he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "I want children's laughter. I want a woman who rides with me to secret meadows." He took a ragged breath. "I want you, Abigail, you and Emma and Sarah and Daniel, not as my housekeeper, as my family." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Yancey, you've only known me 2 months." "I know enough," he insisted, taking her hands in his. "I know you're strong and kind. I know you put your children first. I know your smile lights up a part of me I thought was dead and buried." He squeezed her hands. "I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet. But I'm asking for a chance to court you, to see if what I'm feeling can grow into something real." Tears welled in her eyes. "What about the judge? Your ranch?" "There will be other chances," he said firmly. "I won't trade my heart for a piece of land. I won't do it." "The town will talk," she whispered. "Let them," he said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "We know the truth." He reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek. "So, Mrs. Abigail Evans, may I have your permission to court you?" In answer, she leaned in and kissed him. It was a soft, hesitant kiss, but it was filled with the promise of a future she had never dared to imagine. But a future built on secrets is like a house built on sand. And the secret Yanzi was keeping was a tremor, getting ready to bring everything crashing down. He had chosen her over the deal, but it wasn't just about money. He was defying Judge Carrington, a man who knew exactly what happened in the mine that killed her husband, because the judge was the one who ordered it. The news that Yanzi Tucker was courting the town charity case spread faster than a prairie fire. Silver Creek buzzed with it. Mrs. Holloway nearly fainted from indignation. But Abigail and Yanzi didn't care. They were building a world of their own on Blue Ridge Ranch. He was a thoughtful, gentle suitor. He brought wildflowers for her and carved little wooden animals for the children. He started taking his meals with them in their small cabin, and the sound of his deep laugh mixing with her children's giggles became the soundtrack of Abigail's life. He was teaching them all to be a family. One day in early November, the first snows appeared on the high peaks. "We need to go to town," Yancy announced. "The children need winter coats, and I need supplies." Abigail's stomach twisted into a knot. "I haven't been back since that first day." "You're with me now," he said, taking her hand. His grip was warm and steady. "It's time the town saw that." The next Saturday, they all rode into Silver Creek in Yancey's big wagon. Just as she expected, their arrival stopped conversations dead. People stared. They whispered behind their hands. Yancey helped her down from the wagon as if she were a queen, then lifted down each of the children. He offered her his arm, and she took it, lifting her chin and walking straight into Bartlett's general store. Mrs. Holloway and her cronies were there, of course. They fell silent as the new family entered. "Good morning, ladies," Yanzi said, his voice pleasant. Mrs. Holloway sniffed. "Mr. Tucker, Mrs. Evans. What a surprise." "We're shopping for winter," Yanzi said, his smile never wavering. "Growing children need warm coats, and Abigail needs some new fabric for curtains for the main house." He said main house deliberately. He was sending a message. Mrs. Holloway's eyes widened. As Mr. Bartlett gathered their items, warm coats, sturdy boots, bright red mittens, Mrs. Holloway sidled up to Abigail. "Well, Mrs. Evans," she said with a sickly sweet smile, "it seems your fortunes have certainly improved." Before Abigail could answer, Yanzi was there. "Fortune has nothing to do with it, Mrs. Holloway. Abigail has earned everything she has. I'm the fortunate one." His sincerity was so absolute, it left the woman speechless. For once. As they left the store, Abigail felt a change. The stares were still there, but they were different now. Less mockery, more curiosity. A few people even smiled at the children. Their last stop was the bank. Abigail walked to the counter, her back ramrod straight. Yanzi stood just behind her, a silent pillar of support. "Mr. Peterson," she said to the bank manager, "I've come to make the final payment on my husband's loan." She placed a stack of bills on the counter. Money she had saved, dollar by dollar, from her wages. The manager counted it, then counted it again. He stamped a piece of paper. "This settles the account, Mrs. Evans. Your husband's debts are cleared." A weight she had carried for almost a year simply vanished. As they walked out into the sunlight, Yanzi squeezed her hand. "You did it, Abigail." Tears of pure relief stung her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have," he said softly. "It just would have taken longer. That's who you are." As he helped her into the wagon, she saw them. Across the street, Judge Carrington and his daughter, Olivia. The judge's face was like stone. Olivia looked like she had just swallowed poison. A cold dread washed over Abigail. This wasn't over. Yanzi saw her looking. He deliberately placed his hand on the small of her back, a gesture that was both protective and defiant. "Don't you worry about them," he murmured. "Their good opinion isn't worth having." But it wasn't their opinion she was worried about. It was their power. She didn't know the specifics, not yet, but she knew in her bones that Yanzi's public rejection of the judge's daughter and his open support for her had started a war. And Judge Carrington was not a man who lost wars. Winter descended on the ranch, burying it in a thick blanket of white. The world shrank to the cozy warmth of the main house, where Abigail and the children now lived. The little cabin was empty, a relic of their old life. Evenings were spent by the fire, reading, playing games, listening to Yanzi tell stories of his life on the cattle trail. He was weaving himself into the fabric of their family, thread by thread. On Christmas Eve, he built a roaring fire and decorated a small pine tree with paper stars the children had made. He had presents for all of them: a carved horse for Daniel, a book of fairy tales for Sarah, a silver locket for Emma, a beautiful soft wool shawl for Abigail. Then he pulled one last gift from behind the tree. It was a small, plain box. He handed it to her, a nervous energy about him she'd never seen before. Inside, on a bed of cotton, was a simple gold ring with a single perfect pearl. "It was my mother's," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She told me to give it to the woman who finally captured my heart." The children went still, watching. "Abigail Evans," Yancy said, taking her hand. "These last months, you and your children have brought this house back to life. You've brought me back to life. I can't imagine a day without you in it." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me? Will you all officially be my family?" Abigail couldn't speak. "Say yes, Mama," Emma whispered. Abigail laughed through her tears, a sound of pure joy. "Yes," she said to Yanzi. "Yes, we would be honored to be your family." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He pulled her into his arms, and the children piled on, a tangle of limbs and happy tears. Outside, the snow fell, silencing the world. In that moment, everything was perfect. But secrets have a way of crawling out from the shadows, especially when the snows begin to melt. The day before their wedding, a man rode up to the ranch. He was thin, wiry, and his face was gray with fear. It was Hank, one of Yanzi's ranch hands. "Yanzi," he stammered, his horse breathing hard. "It's Salis, the hand who broke his leg. He's back in town, and he's saying things." Yanzi's face went pale. "What things?" "He's saying his leg wasn't no accident," Hank whispered, looking over his shoulder as if the devil himself were listening. "He's saying you did it, to silence him, about the mine, about Thomas Evans." The perfect world Abigail had built shattered into a million pieces. She looked at Yanzi, the man she was about to marry, the man who had saved her, and for the first time she saw a stranger. A man with a secret so dark it could destroy them all. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Yanzi," she whispered, the ring on her finger suddenly feeling as heavy as a stone. "What is he talking about?" "Abigail, it's not what you think," he started, but his voice lacked conviction. The lie had finally come home. "It was a lie," Yanzi said, his voice raspy. "Celis never broke his leg." Abigail stood frozen in the living room, the wedding dress she'd been sewing draped over a chair, a cruel mockery of the future she thought she had. "He left because I paid him to," Yanzi continued, finally looking at her. The pain in his eyes was staggering. "I had to get him away from here, away from the judge." "The judge?" Abigail's mind was reeling. "What does any of this have to do with Judge Carrington?" "Everything," Yanzi said, and the story came tumbling out, a torrent of guilt and fear held back for a year. He and Thomas had been partners, not just in the mine, but in a bigger land deal. They were trying to buy up acres to stop Judge Carrington from getting a stranglehold on the whole valley. The judge found out. He couldn't have that. The debt Thomas owed wasn't to the bank, Yanzi confessed. It was to Carrington, a poker game the judge had rigged. It was just an excuse. The day of the accident, Carrington's men were at the mine. They weren't there to work. They were there to send a message. They set a charge. Yanzi's voice broke. Too big, too unstable. They just wanted to scare him off the land deal, but it was too much. The whole shaft came down. I was there, Abigail. I tried to pull him out. I saw it happen. Silas had been there too. He'd seen everything. Carrington's men got to him first. They beat him, threatened his family, made him swear he'd disappear and tell everyone he'd had a simple accident. Yanzi had given Silas money to run, to keep his family safe. I didn't tell you because I was ashamed, Yanzi whispered. I was there, and I couldn't save him. I let you believe he died in an accident because the truth was so much worse. And I was afraid of what the judge would do to you and the children if he knew you were with me. His rejection of Olivia hadn't just been about love. It had been an act of war. And now the judge was calling in his soldiers. He'd found Silas, threatened him again, and forced him to come back to Silver Creek to spread a new lie. That Yanzi had caused the collapse to get the land for himself. It was perfect, diabolical. It painted Yanzi as a monster and made the judge look like the man who uncovered the truth. Abigail sank into a chair, her head spinning. The man she loved wasn't a killer. He was a man trapped, haunted by his failure to save his friend. The kindness he'd shown her wasn't a lie. It was penance. She looked at the ring on her finger. It wasn't a promise of a simple, happy future anymore. It was a battle standard. He's trying to ruin you, she said, her voice quiet but clear as a bell. He will, Yanzi said, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He has a witness, even a false one. No one will believe me against the word of a judge. Abigail stood up. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard anger. They will believe me, she said. She walked over to him and placed her hands on his cheeks, forcing him to look at her. You saved my family, Yanzi Tucker. You stood up for me when no one else would. Now it's my turn. What are you going to do? I'm going to town, she said, her eyes blazing, and I'm going to find the truth. Abigail rode into Silver Creek alone. She didn't look like destitute Abby anymore. She wore a simple but well-made dress, her hair was neatly tied back, and she rode one of Yanzi's best horses with the confidence he had taught her. But the whispers started again the moment she arrived. This time they were different. Darker. That's her. The one marrying the killer. Poor woman. He fooled her completely. She ignored them. She had one goal, find Silas. She knew he wouldn't be at the saloon, bragging. He would be hiding, terrified. She checked the boarding house, the livery. Nothing. Finally, she went to the one place she never thought she'd go for help. She walked right up the steps of the general store, onto the porch where Mrs. Holloway sat, holding court. The woman's eyes widened in shock. Well, if it isn't Mrs. Evans, or should I say the future Mrs. Tucker, I hear your fiancé is the talk of the town. Where is he, Mrs. Holloway? Abigail asked, her voice steady. Where is who, dear? Silas. The man spreading lies about my fiancé. I know the judge is paying him. I figure you'd know where he's keeping his pet snake. The directness of the attack stunned Mrs. Holloway into a rare silence. One of her friends, however, wasn't so guarded. He's staying in the old trapper's cabin out by the creek. The judge put him up there. Thank you, Abigail said, turning to leave. You can't be thinking of going out there alone. Mrs. Holloway called after her, a strange note of concern in her voice. That man is dangerous. The man I'm marrying is a good man, Abigail said, turning back to face the women. "And Judge Carrington is a murderer. You've all spent a year whispering about me because I was poor. Maybe it's time you started paying attention to the real evil in this town." She left them sitting in stunned silence. The trapper's cabin was dilapidated, barely standing. Celis was inside, drinking from a bottle of whiskey. He jumped when she walked in, his eyes wild with fear and alcohol. "What do you want?" he slurred. "The truth," Abigail said, standing her ground. "I know what the judge made you do. I know what really happened at the mine." "You don't know nothing," he sneered, but his hand was shaking. "I know Yanzi tried to save my husband," she said, her voice softening. "I know he gave you money to keep your family safe. That's not the act of a killer, Celis. That's the act of a good man." A tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. "He'll kill me. The judge. He'll kill my wife and kids if I talk." "And what kind of life will you have if you don't?" she pressed. "Living like a rat, drinking yourself to death in a shack, knowing you sent an innocent man to the gallows, knowing you spat on the memory of my husband." She took a step closer. "Thomas was your friend, wasn't he?" Celis broke. He collapsed onto a stool, sobbing. "He was. A good man. The judge. He's the devil himself. He's got a piece of paper, a ledger, shows the payments to his men, the ones who set the charge. It's in the safe in his office at the courthouse. He showed it to me, to prove he could ruin anyone he wanted. That was it. The proof. "Help me, Celis," Abigail begged. "Help me get justice for Thomas, for Yancy." He looked up at her, his face a mess of tears and despair. "It's impossible. That courthouse is locked up tighter than a drum." "Nothing is impossible," Abigail said, her mind already racing. The harvest ball. The one Olivia had invited Yancy 2 weeks ago. It was tomorrow night. The whole town would be there, including the judge. His office would be empty. It was a crazy plan, a dangerous one. But it was the only one they had. The night of the harvest ball, the entire town of Silver Creek was gathered at the town hall. Judge Carrington was the guest of honor, soaking in the admiration, a wolf in shepherd's clothing. While the music played, two figures slipped through the back alleys of the town, Abigail and Yancy. "This is insane," Yancy whispered, watching the lamp-lit windows of the courthouse. "If we're caught—" "We won't be," Abigail said, her face set with determination. "Celis is waiting by the back window. He used to be a janitor there. He knows how to get it open." It was a desperate gamble, but Celis had agreed. Abigail's words had awakened some long-buried piece of his conscience. They found the window, and, as promised, it was unlocked. Yancy slipped inside the dark, silent courthouse. Abigail stood watch outside, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every minute felt like an hour. The sound of the music from the ball seemed to mock her, a happy tune for a town that had no idea of the darkness at its core. Finally, Yancy emerged from the shadows. He was holding a thin, leather-bound ledger. "I've got it." They ran. Back through the alleys, their feet silent on the packed earth. They didn't go back to the ranch. They went straight to the town hall. They burst through the doors just as the judge was raising a glass for a toast. The music screeched to a halt. Every head turned. "What is the meaning of this?" the judge boomed, his face turning purple. "The meaning," Abigail said, her voice ringing through the silent hall, "is that your reign of terror is over." Yancy held up the ledger. "This book tells a story, Judge, a story about bribes and threats. And murder." The judge lunged for it, but Yancy held it high. "It's all in here," Yancy announced to the stunned crowd. "The payments to the men who collapsed the Silver Creek mine. The order to kill Thomas Evans." A gasp went through the room. "Lies!" the judge sputtered. "This woman is hysterical. and this man is a killer trying to save his own skin." "Is he?" a voice called from the back of the room. The crowd parted. It was Celis, walking with a pronounced limp. "I was there," Celis said, his voice shaking but clear. "I saw it all. The judge's men killed Thomas, and Yanzi Tucker tried to save him. The judge is the killer. He's the one who should hang." The spell was broken. The town's fear of the judge was finally shattered by the undeniable truth. Mrs. Holloway, her face pale with shock, was the first one to move. She walked straight to the town sheriff. "Aren't you going to do something?" she demanded. The sheriff, who had been in the judge's pocket for years, looked at the angry faces of the townspeople, looked at the ledger in Yanzi's hand, and made a choice. He walked toward the stage and took out his handcuffs. "William Carrington," he said, his voice heavy, "you are under arrest for the murder of Thomas Evans." Justice, true and swift, had finally come to Silver Creek. They were married a week later on New Year's Day. It wasn't a grand affair. Just them, the children and the ranch hands, gathered in the living room of the main house while the sun streamed through the windows. The whispers in Silver Creek had finally died down, replaced by a quiet respect. The town had been forced to look at its own reflection, and it had chosen truth over fear. As spring breathed new life into the high country, Abigail planted a garden. Yanzi worked the horses. The children, now officially Tuckers, filled the air with their laughter. They had faced down the worst of their world and had come out the other side, stronger and more united than ever. Their family wasn't just built on love, it was forged in the fires of justice. Yanzi would often look at his wife as she worked in her garden, the sun in her hair, and he knew he was the richest man in Colorado. He hadn't just saved a widow and her children, they had saved him. They had shown him that some treasures can't be measured in acres or dollars, but in courage and truth, and that the greatest fortune of all is having a family to fight for. What Judge Carrington did was a reminder that evil can wear a suit of authority, but it often takes the courage of ordinary people to unmask it. If you found this story of justice and redemption compelling, don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell. You never know what truths are waiting to be uncovered.